This is Kevin Moore from Timba.com with an introduction to Beyond Salsa Piano Volume 6, the first of 4 books on the legendary pianist Iván Melón Lewis.
Para toda la FEU y toda Ciudad de La Habana, Isaac Gao y su grupo.
During his brief 3.5 years on the Havana music scene, Melón Lewis had a profound effect on the history of Cuban piano playing and was the initial inspiration for the Beyond Salsa Piano series. Born in Pinar del Rio, Melón had completed his education as a classical and jazz pianist at La ENA and La ISA when he was recruited to join the Isaac Delgado group in early 1995 after Giraldo Piloto and Tony Perez departed to form Climax. In April 1998, Melón left Cuba for Madrid, where he's played mostly Latin jazz. Some timba with Manolín, el médico de la salsa.
Ay, mami, dime lo que piensas tú, y no te lleves por la mala lengua.
Y no te lleves, no, oye, y no te lleves, no, y no te lleves por las malas lenguas, mira, porque la vida es un trabalengua. Dale mambo. Bueno, tú sabes que somos lo que hay, lo que se vende como pan caliente, lo que prefiere pide la gente, mira, lo máximo. Somos lo que hay, eso, lo que se vende como pan caliente, dice, lo que prefiere pide la gente.
And Alain Perez.
Hablando con Juana el otro día me enteré que eso no era para mí. No te digo más, lo supe hablando con Juana el otro día.
And toured and recorded with platinum mega diva Concha Buica.
Ojalá el dolor del pasado se lo llevara el aire.
Melón's 3.5-year stint with Isaac Delgado may be only a blip on the resume for this die-hard jazz pianist, but for those of us studying Cuban popular music, every detail of that 3.5-year stretch is of the greatest importance. In the next 4 videos, I'll explain why, as well as touching on the importance of Alain Perez, the subject of Beyond Salsa Bass Volume 6 through 9, and of Isaac Delgado himself, one of the most underappreciated masters of modern Cuban music and the creative lightning rod for at least 5 of the greatest bands of the era. We start at the beginning. Isaac Delgado, who changed the spelling of his name after seeing and liking a typo in a publicity photo, began his career as a cellist, finding his true calling as a singer when he heard the late great Cheo Feliciano. Isaac sang with Pachito Alonso and Gonzalo Rubalcaba in the 1980s before being drafted by José Luis El Tosco Cortés for NG La Banda, where he scored a #1 world music hit with a Cubanized cover of a Spanish pop song, Necesito una amiga.
Necesito una amiga que esté siempre apelando. Necesito una amiga que me tienda de la mano.
By the time Delgado left N.J. La Banda to form his own group with N.J. drummer and composer Giraldo Piloto, he had correctly observed that there was almost no market for CDs in impoverished post-Soviet Havana, but there was a torrid and lucrative live music scene of historic proportions. Understanding this dichotomy is the key to understanding Isaac Delgado. His albums are designed for the global salsa market, while his live Cuban act was designed for the streets of Havana. Isaac's live approach was not only hyper-aggressive, it was also extremely free and improvisational. He always chose rhythm sections that were well steeped in jazz, rumba, and funk, and he created a loose and adrenaline-charged environment in which to inspire them. A very compelling analogy can be drawn between Isaac in the 1990s and Miles Davis in the 50s and 60s. Like Miles, when Isaac found a great song, he stuck with it for years, allowing it to take on a life of its own, changing and growing not only from night to night, but from year to year as it was reimagined and reinvented by a succession of world-class musicians. Miles played standards like Round Midnight, Walkin', and If I Were a Bell with his mid-50s group featuring John Coltrane and Philly Joe Jones, and was still playing them 10 years later with Herbie Hancock and Tony Williams. Isaac's own standards, like No Me Mires a los Ojos, were played with pianists Tony Perez, Melón, Pepe Rivero, El Maha, Cucurucho, Rolando Luna, Tony Rodriguez, and Isaac Delgado Jr., with bassists Charles Flores, Alain Perez, Yoel Dominguez, and Frank Rubio, and with a string of extraordinary drummers that included Giraldo Piloto, Jimmy Branley, Yorvis Pico, Yoel Paez, and Bombon Reyes. Each new rhythm section put its own stamp on the classics and added new ones of its own. So what were these live Isaac Delgado standards and where can they be found? Well, two of them, La Temática and La Competencia, also known as Hit Parade, were never taken into the recording studio, but the rest of the live repertoire can be found spread across Delgado's many studio albums. We'll lay out Isaac's full live repertoire over the course of the next 4 videos. Con Ganas from the Piloto era produced 2 tracks, Dos Mujeres and Te Pasa Loco, that were played throughout the 1990s. Piloto had already created 2 arrangements for the 1995 album El Año Que Viene, when he, Tony Perez, and Yonder Diaz left to form Climax and were replaced by Jimmy Branley, Melón, and José Miguel, respectively. El Año Que Viene produced 3 more classic live vehicles, No Me Mires a los Ojos, La Vida Sin Esperanza, and Por Qué Paró. Having set the stage for Melón's entrance into the Delgado group, let's begin our review of Volume 6. After an introductory chapter on Melón's bio and discography, Chapter 2 introduces Timba gears from the point of view of the pianist. If you're aspiring to make the transition from salsa piano to timba piano, timba gears is sort of a good news, bad news scenario. The good news is that for most gear changes, it's the bassist and percussionist who have to do the changing, while the pianist simply continues playing a piano tumbao. The bad news is that this catapults you suddenly into the spotlight. When the bells, congas, and bass tumbao drop out, the pianist becomes the principal timekeeper. And when Isaac, in the heat of battle, suddenly decides he wants to lead his band into a breakdown, he cries out the pianist's name as a signal. The next thing you know, all you hear is Melón playing some ecstatically brilliant piano tumbao with only clave and kick drum as accompaniment. Now, if you're a typical converted jazz pianist picking up some extra gigs in a salsa band, you're used to playing your piano tumbaos in the safety of numbers, and you feel quite comfortable doing so thanks to those 3 hot-blooded Latino drummers who never stop wailing away from every corner of the stage. But what happens when you play a timba gig and those rhythmic lifeguards suddenly and dramatically drop out and leave little old you at center stage in the hot glare of the Klieg lights? This is what timba gears are all about from the pianist's point of view. In timba, the pianist has to take a turn generating the life force of the music. So how do you go about coming up with a piano tumbao for a new coro? Let's start by listening to the coro itself. The old school method is to start with the chord progression and apply the generic clave-aligned salsa montuno rhythm, and voila! You can sing the Si tu mirada matara coro against this and it works just fine, but Piloto had other ideas, composing a figure that jumps back and forth between harmonizing the coro and responding to it. Melón then applies several of the timba piano innovations discussed in our last video, most notably extra notes in the left hand, and then proceeds to further develop the idea with controlled improvisation. Chapter 4 is on La Vida Sin Esperanza, also from El Año Que Viene. La Vida stayed in the live repertoire for about 3 years. Isaac retired it after Melón's departure, but not before it had produced many great live performances, including one that gets my vote as the hottest live track ever preserved on tape. It's from the legendary December 1997 El Palacio de la Salsa concert, known to collectors as the Watrous concert, in honor of musician and journalist Peter Watrous, who had the presence of mind to realize that he was witnessing history in the making, and who brought back a cassette tape of surprisingly good audio quality. To hear this concert in its entirety, just search YouTube for Isaac Watrous concert. I sent this version to Melón, who transcribed 7 distinct tumbaos, each with controlled improvisation variations. Some are used in marcha gear, some in muela, some in presión, and some in bomba. Here's a passage that builds from muela to an epic bomba climax that simply defies description.
que se va con la pelota, mira que se fue, que se fue de horror, se fue, pero va por allá, pero se fue, con la pelota, camina, con la pelota, mira, con la pelota. Palacio de la salsa, caballero. Llegó el momento. A ver cómo están las piernas, la gente que está entrenando todos los días. El que tenga pierna, caballero, baja con nosotros y sube también. A ver, los muchachos de la orquesta están preparados y la gente que esté preparada. Con la mano para arriba, con las dos, con las dos. A ver, bajando, bajando. Ay, vamos bajando. A ver. Vamos bajando, bajando. Caballero, no se ponga flojo de pierna ni nada. Ahí, bajando, bajando, bajando. Vamos poniéndole velocidad, pero suave a la cintura, pero suave a la cintura, pero suave a la cintura. El coro dice así, a ver, ponle velocidad. Vamos subiendo, a ver. Vamos subiendo, 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 Vamos subiendo, caballero. Vamos subiendo, ahí. Vamos subiendo. Vamos subiendo, a ver. Vamos subiendo, 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 subiendo. ¿Qué dice la gente? Pero qué velocidad. Conmigo, conmigo, conmigo. Pero qué velocidad. Oye, que vengo suave, suave, suave. Pero qué velocidad. Pero qué velocidad. Y ponle sentimiento. ¿Qué dice? Pero qué velocidad. Y cuando vienen los muchachos de aquí para allá. Pero qué velocidad. Pero qué velocidad.
And now, sadly, we need to segue from the passions of El Palacio de la Salsa to the mundane details of books, ebooks, MP3s, and MP4s. Volume 6 is the first to include a video product in addition to the usual downloadable MP3s. A valiant idea, but not without a few twists and turns along the way. Here's how it transpired. I started the overall project with MIDI files of Melón playing each tumbao 20 or more times as he would on a gig. I didn't ask him to improvise or to not improvise, just to play the tumbaos as he normally would. I then chose a handful of variations for each tumbao, transcribing each one for the book and looping it to make a track for the audio project. Thus, La Vida 1B means La Vida Sin Esperanza, Tumbao 1, Variation B, looped several times for practice purposes, first at full speed and then in slow motion. As explained earlier, the idea is to keep learning variations until you can't keep them all straight in your head, until you start mixing them together, until you don't know if it's the first half of variation C and the second half of variation F or some slight variation of your own, but you do know that it feels like something you've practiced, something that feels natural under your fingers. In other words, you're using controlled improvisation. Eventually, you'll be able to add ideas of your own while still staying comfortably within the confines of the controlled improvisation groove. As long as you think like a drummer and not like a soloist, you'll be fine. But if you chase one of your genius ideas outside of your groove zone, you'll be greeted by icy glares from the bassist and percussionists. Remember, you can play with no improvisation at all and remain gainfully employed in a Latin band. But if your groove starts getting erratic, even for a beat or two, you'll soon find yourself in the unemployment line, if they had unemployment lines for musicians. Fast forwarding ahead, I now had 4 books on Melón, each with an audio product consisting of looped playback of the variations I'd chosen to transcribe. The next step was to make a video product, but there were 2 problems. First, I didn't want to ask Melón to play through the looped exercises because that's not how he created the parts to begin with. So instead, I asked him to record the video as he'd recorded the MIDI files, to start with the basic idea of each tumbao and then play as he would normally on a gig. Thus, the Melón video and the Melón audio are not the same performances, but if you compare them to each other and to the many live bootlegs of the 1997 Isaac Delgado group, you'll get a realistic idea of how this music is actually played. The second problem was that Melón was in Spain, so I couldn't make the videos anyway, until the auspicious arrival on the scene of Vašík Greif, a Melón fanatic and a great musician in his own right, who volunteered to travel from the Czech Republic to Madrid to film Melón. But Vašík, being Vašík, was not satisfied with this great contribution to all of our musical educations. He also sought out the great Alain Paris, also in Madrid, and enticed him to come into the studio and record bass along with the Melón videos, from which I was able to write the Beyond Salsa bass books, volumes 6 through 9, although volumes 8 and 9 are not yet done. So in the case of the Alain books, the video product does match the audio product. I did the same thing with Alain that I did with Melón, isolating variations of each bass tumbao and looping them. But with Alain, as with Calixto Oviedo, it was audio that I was looping, not MIDI. The video product has 3 versions of each performance: camera angle 1, camera angle 2, and a split screen version. The audio has Melón in one channel and Alain in the other. The video product for the Alain books have this same audio, but the video, of course, is of the bass. More examples of these can be found on this same YouTube channel. You'll notice that Alain plays all sorts of percussive sounds when he plays, almost as if he's accompanying himself on congas. These break down into 3 categories: a left-hand tap and 2 different types of right-hand taps, all of which are lovingly notated in the books. The songs covered in the bass and piano volumes match exactly for volumes 6, 7, and 8, but diverge partway through volume 9 because Alain stayed in the group for another year, recording La Primera Noche and writing songs like La Sandunguita, Amigo Juan, and Que Me Disculpen. As you can see from the chart, Melón Volume 9 covers many more songs than the others. This was the point where I started writing longer $30 books instead of shorter $20 books like the first 8 volumes of Beyond Salsa Piano. Here are the list prices for all of the currently available products. If you go to this page at beyondsalsa.info/purchase, each of those gray boxes is a link to the page that sells the product. Looking ahead, Volume 7 covers the 3rd great live track from El Año Que Viene, Por Qué Paró, and Luz Viajera, the first from the 1996 album, Otra Idea.
Bueno, por eso, preparadas señoritas, que voy, ataca la melón.
Como rebota la
Y
pelota,
mueve la cintura, mimi.
como rebota la pelota,
Oye, muévelo, que se ve.
como rebota la pelota,
Y dice,
como rebota la pelota,
vaya, camínalo.
como rebota la pelota,
Vaya.
como rebota la pelota.
Some Timba with Manolín, el médico de la salsa.
Ay, mami, dime lo que piensas tú y no te lleves por la mala lengua.
Y no te lleves, no, oye, y no te lleves, no, y no te lleves por las malas lenguas, mira, porque la vida es un trabalengua. Dale mambo. pan caliente. Lo que prefiere pide la gente, mira, lo máximo.
Ojalá el dolor del pasado se lo llevara el aire.
Melón's 3.5-year stint with Isaac Delgado may be only a blip on the resume for this die-hard jazz pianist, but for those of us studying Cuban popular music, every detail of that 3.5-year stretch is of the greatest importance. In the next 4 videos, I'll explain why, as well as touching on the importance of Iván Perez, the subject of Beyond Salsa Bass Volumes 6 through 9, and of Isaac Delgado himself, one of the most underclassical and jazz pianists at La Ena and La Isa when he was recruited to join the Isaac Delgado group in early 1995 after Geraldo Piloto and Tony Perez departed to form Climax. In April 1998, Melón left Cuba for Madrid, where he's played mostly Latin jazz.
Somos lo que hay, eso, lo que se vende como pan caliente, dice, lo que prefiere pide la gente.
And Iván Perez.
Hablando con Juana el otro día me enteré que eso no era para mí. No te digo más, lo supe hablando con Juana el otro día.
And toured and recorded with platinum mega diva Concha Buica. This is Kevin Moore from Timba.com with an introduction to Beyond Salsa Piano Volume 6, the first of 4 books on the legendary pianist Iván Melón Lewis.
Para toda la FEU y toda Ciudad de La Habana, Isaac Delgado y su grupo.
During his brief 3.5 years on the Havana music scene, Melón Lewis had a profound effect on the history of Cuban piano playing and was the initial inspiration for the Beyond Salsa Piano series. Born in Pinar del Rio, Melón had completed his education as a classical